The year is 1978, and on one particular evening, millions of people in the USA have tuned in to watch their favorite TV show, The Dating Game. At the start of the show, after a partition moves to the side, three silhouetted bachelors are revealed. Host Jim Lange introduces Bachelor number 1, a man he says is a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the darkroom at the age of 13, fully developed. As the audience laughs at the gag, he adds, between takes you might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Lange announces his name as Rodney Alcala, just as the spotlight shines on a long-haired, handsome man with glistening white teeth. What no one knows is this man is a prolific killer who murdered before the show and he'll murder after. He's a psychopath of the highest degree who will one day be called by police a killing machine. He also wins the heart of the bachelorette in the show, but the date doesn't go down very well. We'll come back to that later. First of all, to appear in one of the most popular TV shows in US history while you're in the process of becoming one of the world's most vile serial killers is about as brazen and pathologically narcissistic as you can get. To understand this, we must look at Alcala's past. He was born on August 23rd in 1943 in San Antonio, Texas. When he was a kid, his pop moved the family back to Mexico, but a few years later, his old daddy just picked up and left. A few years after that, the mother took 11-year-old Rodney back to LA along with his two sisters. It wasn't a happy childhood, and he certainly was never discovered in the darkroom by his father at the age of 13. At that point in his life, his pop was well gone, and he wanted nothing to do with Rodney. But abandonment by a parent is hardly unusual. It can be devastating for a child, but in the history of serial killing, childhood traumas run deeper than being brought up by a single-parent family. Still, something happened during his formative years that may have led to what he became. It was evident something was wrong with him not long after he joined the army at the age of 17. 3 years later, he went AWOL after having what was described as a breakdown. When he returned to the army, a military psychiatrist diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder. That's when a person shows no regard to how others feel about their actions. This lack of conscience can manifest as aggression, sometimes getting involved in petty crimes. Whatever Alcala did was enough for the army to discharge him on medical grounds. The army was right. Years later, he'll be diagnosed with malignant narcissism and sexual sadism comorbidities. If you don't understand those terms, you soon will. Personality disorders aren't always evident to other people, so Alcala seemed to have no problems picking up a degree from the UCLA School of Fine Arts. It was 1968 when he graduated, the year after the Summer of Love, a time when being a budding artist was a fashionable endeavor. Nonetheless, Alcala was far from embracing the hippie movement and the endless love it promoted. He'd already decided to become a monster. That year, he lured a young girl named Tali Shapiro to his apartment in Hollywood. There, he beat her with an iron bar until she was unconscious. He'd been spotted, though, taking the girl back, and so that person called the cops. It was just a pity that when they got to his apartment, they found no sign of Alcala and only a girl lying in a pool of blood. What they didn't know is that he was hiding somewhere nearby. But because the girl was still breathing, all efforts were focused on keeping her alive. That's when Alcala somehow slipped away. The girl was in a coma for 32 days and later had to learn to walk again. The good news is, decades later, she testified against him, with her loving husband watching from the gallery. Knowing he was now wanted, he left California and went to New York, where he enrolled at NYU Film School. There, he changed his name to John Berger. In the meantime, cops back in California had found something worrying. Photos he'd taken of young women and girls. It seemed like this man would strike again. In New York, though, when frequenting the trendy clubs and bars with his camera in hand, he was the arty photographer guy who people loved to pose for. They had no idea that when he looked at them through the viewfinder, he was imagining what they'd look like after he had killed them. In 1961, the FBI put him on its most wanted list, and that meant pictures of Alcala being circulated. He'd already killed again by this time, a young woman who worked as a flight attendant. She'd been strangled, and the killer had arranged her body in a certain kind of pose. Now, we need to explain something. Serial killers might have a modus operandi, which could be how they pick up their victims, but they may also leave a personal mark on their crimes called a signature. The MO often changes, but signatures nearly always stay the same. That's because they relate to the psychological needs of the killer, and for Alcala, he derived sexual gratification from leaving his victims in certain poses, an act criminal profilers call staging. Police didn't know it yet, but in the years to come, they would find quite a few bodies that had been staged. After getting a job at a New Hampshire arts camp for children, one day, 2 of the kids Alcala taught saw his face on a wanted poster in the post office. They called the cops, and Alcala was swiftly arrested and sent back to California to face the music. Okay, crime solved. Surely that must have been it. But you know very well that one day he'd win the dating game. What went wrong? The main reason why he didn't spend a long time in prison was that Shapiro's parents had decided to leave the crime-infested USA and move to Mexico. They didn't want their daughter to return to the US to testify and suffer more trauma than she'd already gone through. And so with no other witnesses, Alcala did a short stint in prison for the crime of assault. Cops had no idea at this point he'd killed a woman in New York. He was back out on the streets in 17 months after a parole board found that the educated artist with a smooth tongue to seem like a person who really regretted what he'd done. Remember, this man was a psychopath, a monumental manipulator. The parole board was no match for his deceit. But then it should have been known to the authorities what Alcala was capable of 2 months after his release when he was arrested again for picking up a girl when she was on the way to school. He pushed her into smoking some weed, after which he tried to kiss her. She reported him, and for what he'd done, he ended up spending 2 more years in prison. Yet again, he managed to convince the parole board that he was mentally well and not a danger to society. He even persuaded his parole officer to allow him to stay outside the state. He moved back to New York City where he murdered 23-year-old Ellen Jane Hover, a wealthy socialite whose godparents were Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. In her diary that police later found, the last entry stated that she was going to meet with this photographer, John Burr, that looked a lot like John Berger, and it was known that this very attractive woman had been hanging around with some strange-looking dude. In fact, her boyfriend asked her who was the freaky guy she was with. She replied, "Oh, he's all right, he's a photographer." It took years to join the dots though, and Alcala wasn't convicted of that crime until 2013. He returned to LA in 1978 and soon got a job as a typesetter for the Los Angeles Times. After a while, he began showing his artwork to some of his colleagues. This art consisted of hundreds of photographs he'd taken of girls and young women. Those who saw the photos could have had no idea their colleague might have killed the girls they were looking at. One of his co-workers at the Times did later say that it seemed rather weird that Alcala was shooting snaps of young girls. The colleague later said, "When I asked why he took the photos, he said their moms asked him to. I remember the girls were naked." Boys also appeared in some photographs, and they were told the same as all the other people who sat to pose for Alcala. He was a professional, he saw something in them. They were his models, and one day he'd make them famous. Now we arrive at the beginning again when this killer had the audacity to smile in front of the camera while millions of Americans sat glued to their TVs. As you know, he won the game, but how did it go down? He certainly came across as unnerving, unnatural, but that's easy to say in hindsight. To give you an example of why he won, the woman behind the screen asked him, "I'm serving you for dinner. What are you called and what do you look like?" Alcala responded, "I'm called a banana and I look really good." She then asked him to be more descriptive and he replied, "Peel me." Maybe that doesn't sound especially crazy, but his fake open-mouthed grin in front of the camera did look kinda maniacal. When it was announced she'd picked him as the winner, he smiled like a wolf who'd just been told he won an all-expenses-paid day out with the 3 pigs. They won some free tennis lessons and a trip to the Magic Mountain theme park, although they never ended up going because the woman said he was just too creepy. She called the show the next day and said, "I can't go out with this guy. There's weird vibes that are coming off him. He's very strange. I'm not comfortable. Is that going to be a problem?" It wasn't a problem, so the date never happened. It seems a few people, including other male contestants, felt this guy was a bit unhinged. The producer later admitted he had a mystique about him that I found uncomfortable. It was another rejection for Alcala, a reminder of the abandonment by his father. The narcissist was furious now, and someone had to pay. There could have been any number of victims soon after he was jilted by the Bachelorette, but as far as future convictions go, in 1979 he brutally murdered 18-year-old Jill Barkham, who had run away from New York and landed in California. He hit her in the face with a rock and strangled her, after which he positioned her dead body so her knees were on the ground and her head was in the dirt. Police said she looked like a rolled-up ball. Soon after, he used a claw hammer to kill a 27-year-old nurse named Georgia Wixted. Her body was found staged in her Malibu apartment. Other victims included a 33-year-old legal secretary, Charlotte Lamb, who was found in the laundry room at the bottom of her apartment block. Again, the body had been staged. 21-year-old Jill Parenteau was discovered in her apartment not long after, and she too had been positioned in a certain way. That same month, Alcala was walking down a road in Huntington Beach, a city southeast of Los Angeles known as the Surf City. There, he met 2 young girls, Robin Samso and her buddy Bridget Wilvert. He asked them to pose for him so he could take photos, but a resident soon approached them after becoming suspicious. Wilvert got on her bicycle and headed to her dance class, but the next time Samso was seen was when police found her beaten-up body at the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains. Her friends told police about the man who'd taken their photograph. After a sketch of the guy had been passed around, Alcala's parole officer told him he knew the face. The game was almost up. Cops went to Alcala's mother's house, and there they found a receipt that led him to a storage locker in Seattle. In that locker, they found Samso's earrings as well as hundreds of photos of girls and young women. In 1980, he was convicted of Samso's murder and sentenced to death. but that was overturned when it was discovered that there had been some prejudice because the jury had been informed about his previous crimes. Years passed, and with DNA evidence, he was indicted for more murders. In prison, he wrote a book that described his wrongful arrest and the corruption of those who'd put him in prison. He even sued the prison after he slipped and fell, blaming the accident on the low-fat diet he'd been refused. This was all in line with his malignant narcissism diagnosis. He was in and out of court over the years, but what police wanted to know was who were all the girls in the hundreds of photos he'd taken. Some of the photos were released to the public, but because of the sexual nature of many of them, the vast majority remained behind closed doors. 21 women who'd seen the photos told police it was them in the image, with another 6 families coming forward to tell the cops they thought their loved one who was gone missing and was never found was in some of the images. In 2013, police linked a cold case to one photo, but still today there's a mystery about those people in the photos. Moreover, 900 pictures have never even been released to the public. That's why anyone involved with Alcala's case thinks he might have killed many more people than the few he was convicted of killing. He may have murdered as many as 130 women and girls, so he's still a person of interest in various investigations. It remains to be seen if the full extent of his crimes will ever be known. But when that cop called him a killing machine, he was likely right. As we write this, Alcala is a 77-year-old man residing in California State Prison. Maybe he'll come forward and admit to more crimes, but psychopaths aren't generally known for their remorsefulness. We'll doubt he'll ever admit that he never once went skydiving. As for if he'll ever have his date with lethal injection, it's doubtful, seeing as he's so old, and in 2019, California instituted a moratorium on the death penalty, which means a reprieve for those sentenced to death. Now, you need to watch Serial Killer with more victims than any other killer in American history. Or have a look at this.